Welcome back to Cheap Pop, where my friend Matt and I try to take a film, video game, television show, break it down, flip it, and reverse it while giving you our insights and some interesting analysis. Maybe you learn something new, maybe you don't. We don't really care. That's kind of our show. We're going to do our thing. Today, we're talking about the conclusion of the Neon Genesis Evangelion. I was going to say the original series, but then that would imply there was another series, which there's not. It's the one series. So we're finishing the original 26-episode series of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And you got some opinions about this, Matty boy. From what I understand, you are not so much a fan, which probably puts you in the majority. But let me hear it. What you got?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to, kind of take my feelings about this episode and then use it to this episode of our podcast. So for the next podcasting time we're about to give you, we're going to go ahead and completely negate the whole thing we've been talking about prior and just kind of go do our own thing that really has nothing to do with what we've been wanting to see, answering any questions, just going into like a bunch of random shit happening and photos of things that don't make sense because they're not anime. It's just pictures of, I'm sure, somewhere that he works or lives or something, or maybe it has nothing to do with that. I hate this episode so much. Last episode, I was like, you know what? How could anyone burn someone's building down or start fires or something? I was like, this dude's lucky he didn't get death threats after this. If he did get death threats. He's lucky he's alive after this because it's ridiculous. Like, this episode sucked so much. And it's all of the things I hate in all of the previous episodes where I feel like they didn't know what to do. So they're like, reuse dialogue, reuse dialogue, reuse dialogue. That's the whole episode. It's just reuse dialogue. That's all it is. I seriously took so many freaking notes, but my notes are just me writing the things that are being said. I don't care about the content. There's numerous times in here where I'm like, I hate this. I'm not taking any more freaking notes on this show. This is bullshit. Like, I'm pretty sure that's a couple of times. Yeah, there's a lot of that in here. So I hate this episode. How'd you feel about it?
All right. I'm detecting you weren't a fan. Yeah, like I said, I tried to brace you so many times throughout this podcast, putting out there in your mind, 25 and 26 are weird. I don't want to say nobody. The majority of people are not a fan of 25, 26. And if this was just the end of the anime and there was never anything else Evangelion after this, I would be right there with you, because the first time watching it, I was like, what did I watch? What was instrumentality? Like, they tell us like what its purpose is. And we kind of have a conclusion from this to draw at the end, but we don't have any actual broader real world implications. Unlike episode 25, we don't get other glimpses into like reality as things are unfolding. Like, we saw dead Misato and Risuko. We saw Asuka sitting in Unit 2 at the bottom of some body of water or something in like a fetal position, like she was ready to die. And you're like, how did we get here? What are these tidbits going to be? Are we going to see greater context to this, maybe as Shinji is working through this personal crisis or whatever it is? And the answer is a big fat no. No, we will not. Whereas episode 25 really tried to delve into not just Shinji, although Shinji was kind of the vehicle through which instrumentality was occurring, it still tries to go into a little bit of like Asuka and Misato and Rei. And so you're like, okay, we're deconstructing these characters, making them face their kind of inner truths or ugliness they don't want to face about themselves, and that's interesting. But then this one straight up tells you, and the first red flag is like in the first 12 seconds of the episode, where you get that note card that's like, I mean, really, there's too many people to focus on to show you all of instrumentality, so we're just going to focus on Shinji. And you're like, okay, so you're setting an expectation up front. And focus on Shinji they do, because all of episode 26 is Shinji's personal crisis, his depression, his resistance against growth, and kind of just looking within himself and like loving himself, essentially. And like this entire episode is building towards him trying to find that acceptance that, hey, it's okay just to like exist and be here. And like, you have to take care of yourself. As much as you want validation from outside sources like others, you're the one in charge of taking care of you. you're the only one who can do it. And so you have to take care of yourself. That's what all this amounts to. That is in a nutshell what this
That's 30. You just saved everyone 30 minutes. That's the whole freaking episode.
Yes. So this episode came out, and there's multiple titles for it. The Beast That Shouted I at the Heart of the World. The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World. The other one that I like is just Take Care of Yourself, because that's literally like the entire theme of this episode. So this came out in March of 1997. Like I said, you don't get background context of what happens coming out of human instrumentality. It's not even quite clear that that's what is happening at the end of this, and I think that was also left intentionally open to interpretation. But I look at this and say, and I mentioned this in a previous episode, Anno had, working through this entire process, he was working through a deep depression. He went from a relative nobody in the industry, or certainly not a rock star, to like huge popularity and fandom, and I think it overwhelmed him a little bit. I think he kind of lost that sense of self, being overworked and burnt out. He really only had material for he had a clear idea of material for about 19 episodes, stretched it to 24, felt like he hit everything he could, and then he's like, they basically came back and were like, you got 2 episodes left that you're on the hook for. And I think he basically decided, like, real world implication, I don't know how much more to answer or go into, so I'm just going to try and turn this, because so much of this of Evangelion is kind of reflection of his own personal struggles with things. Like, if you actually read about like his relationship with his own father, it's really messed up. His father sounds like he was pretty awful. So you just have things like this that all contributed to this, and this was like his vehicle for therapy. And as the show went on, and he sank deeper into this depression and burnout and everything, it became more hyper-focused on like the psychoanalysis stuff. And so when he gets to the end of the last 2 episodes, it's almost like it is trying to almost examine his own struggle with things and find that sense of peace and calmness within himself, which is why I think, as unpopular as these 2 episodes generally are, I think that's probably why it hurt him more that the fans did react negatively. Because it's him kind of laying bare his own soul, essentially, and trying to work through his own stuff, and his own fans, really dragging him for it, and death threats and all of that. And I understand that, but I also understand that he missed the mark on what people wanted. If he had that in addition to, like, if this was an epilogue to an actual conclusion, I think people would feel differently.
Yeah, if you answered some of our questions that you are the one that created for us, I don't think people would be as mad. But you left all of these open-ended things, and this is coming from a person who loves an open-ended story. Every movie that leaves something for you to figure out sticks with you in a really good way. Yep. But it has to be within reason. And his is not. He's leaving you with a world of questions, and you have no answer. You have no idea what's going on. And essentially, everybody is kind of fucked right now. Like, nothing went well, and it's not that you can't have a bad ending to a show, but it's like you gave it a bad ending, and you didn't answer all these questions. It's like, I don't know how you thought people weren't going to be pissed. Now, I will say that if you are going through depression, like, that would have a very severe impact on you writing a show. If he legitimately thought that 19 episodes summed up this show, that makes me concerned about him knowing, like, how to finish a show more than how to fill the middle of a show. I'm not going to say start it, because I feel like that was poorly done as well.
Yeah, when I say 19 episodes, that doesn't mean 1 through 19. And in that same interview I was citing, he says really it took him about 6 or 7 episodes to feel like he found like the thing. He rewrote the first 6 episodes numerous times, and he actually hates episode 1. So really, you were talking about like episode 6 or 7 through about 24 is what he had mapped out.
Yeah, those are the best ones.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying. Yeah.
20, okay, yeah. I'll just disclose the last 2. 25, honestly, is like a really great episode compared to 26, which is sad because 25 still sucks.
Yeah. I think 25 could have been fine if it had had an actual episode follow-up, but other than like a 5-minute out of nowhere swerve in this one, there's no actual like extended animation. It's all stills like you were talking about, but we'll get into that. So this whole thing is we're in the mind of Shinji. We're trying to explore and decode some of this stuff. We're examining this idea of, again, the theme of the show is like don't run away, his struggle with standing and facing something, even if it's painful. And it's kind of examining like his projections of other people and how they're responding to him. And so some people are saying like it's fine to run away if the thing you're running away from is painful. And others are kind of pointing out that running away from something painful, basically behaving in an almost cowardly way, is a different type of pain. So it's pain begetting pain doing that. And so like he's trying to work this out and figure it out. We do have a couple glimpses in there where I almost feel like, even though we're told this is all in Shinji's mind, it gets real confusing where it's like his projection of Rei talking to his projection of Asuka, asking like, who do you live for? Asuka's like, oh, well, myself, clearly. And Shinji's, meanwhile, other side of the coin is like, I guess myself. Like, he doesn't really have any will behind it, like that's the whole thing, is even though Asuka's also broken, she at least has a real sense of self, even if she doesn't always have that worth tied to it. She knows what she should, and Shinji doesn't. Like he doesn't know how to do anything unless it's something he's told to do or that he believes he'll be praised for, because all of his sense of meaning and validation comes from exterior sources.
Yeah, this episode's just so rough. I don't even know where to start on half of this.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just jump through particular points. You have one point where Shinji, another theme of this episode is Shinji, no matter what anyone tells him, and some of the advice they give him, I actually think is really insightful, like concise advice there. Like I kind of paraphrased the quote earlier, but talking about, looking for this validation. Yeah, the only person who can console you and truly understand you is you yourself. So you need to take care of yourself. And like there are so many times where something is presented to Shinji and he either just doesn't get it or he like rejects it and pushes back. But I think this is really intuitive or really emblematic of someone who's struggling with depression, because as crazy as it might sound, you can become sort of set in or almost comfortable in your depression, in the fact that you are resistant to things that are unfamiliar and change. And so that's how you have the person who is like, here are some things you can do that will positively change your life. These are the steps you take, but it's like it's all overwhelming to them. And it's some sort of change where they feel like they're losing or giving up a sense of agency. And so they're staying with that. And that's kind of what this episode felt like, is someone will tell Shinji something, like lay out this explanation, and then he's just like, how can I take care of myself? I don't even know myself. How can I love myself? I don't even know myself. Like all these things, he's just continually doing it. And then it's like they have to approach this from another angle. And I just take this whole thing as like instrumentality playing out these projections. It's almost like instrumentality, sort of like the angels would do, like talking to you through the sense of like how you would process it. So it's like how the angels would approach you as your younger self or as another person that you love or care about. This is like instrumentality utilizing these projections of other people within Shinji's heart to try and help him solve himself, because at the end of the day, he's going to ultimately decide whether we proceed with instrumentality or whether we're going to back away at the last moment. And again, that's open to interpretation what we end up doing, but I think it's like instrumentality is like trying to guide him through this, like whatever you decide, you got to make a decision. And he is very unwilling to do that for a while.
Yeah, I liked, and there's some stuff I wanted to go back and talk about too with, I wanted to make a correction on one of our last episodes. So we're talking about Lilith, and I realize this is I'm just bringing up things that we were just having my girlfriend and I were having a discussion on today. So Lilith is not Eve. Those are two separate people. Lilith is Adam's first wife before
Yes.
Eve, who was commonly written out of modern day biblical writings, and a lot of speculation is that has to do with like because she was really like advocating free will and knowledge and learning, and I think there was even something about Lilith in some representations maybe being the snake in the Adam and Eve scenario, which may play into some of my thoughts later. But the next part I want to get into here is I did like a section of this where they're talking about these people together. And instrumentality, still, I have no idea what's going on. I have not seen the movie, so I am in the dark more than you considerably. But to me, this feels like this is not just Shinji. This feels like we are analyzing a number of different people at the same time. In my head, and we kind of discussed this a little bit before, I think everyone is in Lilith or changing into Lilith at this point. So I do think we're getting more character background on other people, and I feel that it's not just Shinji's projections of these people. Like Asuka feels like she's genuinely getting analyzed at the same time as Shinji, and I don't think that's his interpretation of her. I think that's her going through instrumentality as well. I kind of don't, and if that is true, I don't like that they pinned it just being Shinji, because it doesn't feel like that as we're watching. But all these people go through different revelations, and it just goes back and forth from character to character. And Fitsuki, I think, starts and he says, people live in packs to survive. Gendo says that we can't live on our own, thinking of Yui. And all these different things are said, like, why is this so painful? Why is it so lonely? Just talking about like all the reasons that we are lonely as human beings, and knowing that we in this scenario are coming from Lilith is like multiple beings being spawned from one can't really be a whole, because they're missing something from their originator. So it's like, you're, even if you're believing in like the biblical sense of like God and Adam and Eve, it's like you are far removed from the person that started this, and with every split off, you're a little bit less and you're missing another piece. So yeah, they're trying to fill in all of these gaps. But I did like what they said about, it's like we try to fill these gaps naturally in our lives with, like comfort that we get from another person, whether that's holding someone's hand or receiving a compliment or like pursuing someone in a sexual nature. It's like, it's all of these things we're trying to do to figure out how to regain the things that we've, I guess not lost, but more that we've never had, that we've known that we've had an absence for. And I did think that was very interesting, and I do like it in the sense of things. So there are some things I pulled out of this episode that I did enjoy, just not as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. And they talk about that even on a smaller scale, like the idea of like the first other in your life is your mother, and like they're talking about that in the sense of like a child, grows in the mother's womb, and so like they're two but also one. And then once you are separated from, once you're born and separated physically in that sense, it's kind of like the mother is like losing to an extent a piece of herself, and the child, as that relationship, develops and distances, same sort of thing. So the parallel to that is Gendo saying like his in episode 25 that this whole idea is a return to the mother we lost. And so yes, I agree with that interpretation that all of instrumentality is like, I think about it as like all of humanity, like all of their consciousnesses like blending into one, almost like the LCL that like runs from Adam or Lilith or whatever we saw in the basement, almost like everything boiling down back into that and then like returning physically to Lilith. And so I don't know where that eventually ends, at what point like we move into like one consciousness that's almost like one with more or less a God at that point, would be like how it seems like it's presenting it. So I don't know why in the long run that's better, but yeah, it seems like the path there is like comforting in some weird way, which feels like a very Freudian thing, which again, given how much psychoanalysis stuff and psychiatry and all of that Hideki Anno was reading up on at the time. Makes sense why that would find its fingerprints into his work, you know.
And if I were to be in a position where I knew that this is the last episode I've got and I don't know where the story is going forward and being pissed off or not, I do want to come to what I think would be the conclusion of this series. And in my head, I think I did develop what I think that would be, is that all of these people on Earth, not sure how, not sure that it matters, somehow get blended back into Lilith. And we're told with the reveal of, gosh, I can't even remember his name now, the kid that got killed that was Adam's soul.
Toji? Kaoru.
Kaoru, yes, thank you. So after the whole thing with Kaoru happens, we get blended together, and he was supposed to be the last angel, so he was the final one. So my thought is that with the Dead Sea Scrolls, I would say Dead Sea Scrolls probably, because Gendo's got to be getting his information from somewhere, whether he fully believes it or not. Is that although that might be the last angel, that maybe after the last angel, the next confrontation is God. And their thought is Lilith in her current form, missing all of these pieces of herself, will not be strong enough to defeat God. So by using human instrumentality, we learn how to refill the pieces of ourselves and become one together to essentially go back into Lilith, strengthening her and being able to like actually represent a being that has a chance, like a fighting chance against God and a recreation of the world, whether that be splitting things the way they were before or something different. But that's where my show in my head would end.
Yeah.
And who would win that fight? I don't know, but I think that's what we're prepping for, or that's what I would hope that we were prepping for.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting for sure, and I could see how in Gendo's line of thinking that would track. Where we start getting really weird with our deconstructing of things is, I think, the point where we get the like very minute, detailed sketch of Shinji like floating in open space, and they're talking about this concept of freedom from everything, ambiguity, limitations, apparently including gravity, space, and time. And I thought this was like a really interesting way that they kind of discuss the idea of freedom, because Shinji's there and he has total freedom, but he feels, unstable, unrooted, like he's anxious floating like that. And so it's like, here, we'll draw you a horizon to stand on. And so it's like they draw the ground underneath him on how he can stand. It's like, there, you've technically lost a degree of freedom. Your freedom has been reduced by a degree, but you feel safe. And then like they're talking about like as he's then moving about and he's walking or whatever, how like that's his will having like direct action, like him enacting his will in something. And like this whole idea they're kind of going back to is like the world, you almost like create the world in your perception of it within your heart at any given moment. And so like as he's in this situation trying to understand like his sense of self-agency and like just how he wants to view the world instead of looking at it from this one perspective, it's trying to like illustrate how, if you remove everything, which is what you've seemingly wanted, just to get rid of everything, yes, you have freedom, but you lose all of this sense of security and meaning and purpose and everything. And then we start getting into like this idea of like yourself and like what it means to be you. So some of these quotes here that I really like that I took the notes on, they're basically saying like, if nothing exists except for you, then you won't be able to determine the shape, the self you present to the world, essentially. You learn your shape by looking at and comparing it to others. If I can only be me when others are around me. And that was the other one I had. So an interesting sort of idea that like, if you really were completely alone, do you have like a true self at that point? Because there's nothing you're showing it to. And like that's an interesting sort of debatable point, but ideas like that in this episode still piqued my interest, where I was like, oh, okay. I like that. Again, it's a very unusual delivery method, and given the context of what we're expecting at this point, I totally understand the frustration. I think I'm okay with 25, 26 only because End of Evangelion exists. 25, 26, you can, some people say replace those with End of Evangelion. Some people say they're like alternate reality thing, just like they show us later. Like you can have this idea of an alternate possible reality. I almost think about it as here's the 2 episodes for the finale of the series, and then here's the made-for-TV movie that almost replaces them effectively, or maybe theatrical release, but the movie essentially that almost like is doing 25, 26, but showing it in the more conventional way you want, and you get some overlap where you can see how they can even blend together, or if you want to view them in the sense of like replacing them, that works as well.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about the, real quick, just touch on the little sitcom world that we see for a moment, the only parts that are actually animated in this episode, really?
Yeah, you want to start us off there?
Sure. So Shinji wakes up in his room, and
oh, yes, this part.
Asuka is waking him up for school, and very expositionally, awkwardly telling us that she's his childhood friend, and she gets him up for school every morning. Downstairs, Gendo is reading the paper, and Yui is washing the dishes. And it's just very, like, happy-go-lucky, like, oh, everything's fine, this is a world without angels and the Avas and all of that, but look at how all of us are living this normal life. And the funniest thing in this episode to me is as Shinji and Asuka are going to school, they're talking about, like, oh, did you hear we're getting a new transfer student today? And Asuka says, like, well, yeah, considering they're making this city the new capital starting next year, I bet we'll get a lot more transfer students coming in soon. And then we see the most distinctly odd Rei Ayanami I think we ever see.
I'm so excited.
Totally bubbly and like completely not herself, running down the street with like a piece of toast hanging out of her mouth. Crashes into Shinji as they go around a corner, quickly covers up, like, because her skirt, I guess, bunched up a little bit. And she is the transfer. They don't realize this yet, but in the classroom setting, you see all the kids talking. Miss Misato is apparently the teacher, and all of the boys, including Shinji, are absolutely drooling over her. I thought it was also interesting that when Toji and Glasses are asking Shinji about the new girl and everything like that, they're like, oh, I'm so jealous you got to see her panties, and Shinji's like, I mean, I only got to see them a little bit. It's just another very odd thing, like when you're used to seeing Rei and Shinji in particular in like one light, and then you see this version of them, you're like, whoa, what the hell? Like, this is almost like whiplash effect. And I do like, though, that Shinji and Asuka still bicker, like an old married couple, even though they, in this world, they actually are friends and not just like kind of pushed together by way of being Ava pilots. And Rei is introduced to the class, and immediately she like sees Shinji and she's like, oh, you're the perv who tried to like sneak a peek at my panties or whatever. And Asuka's like coming to Shinji's defense, and they're just bickering. It's just a weird, funny little glimpse of something. And it's, I don't know, there's nothing else like that in Ava, and I get what they're going for, but it is almost, especially after this episode as it's unfolded thus far, it feels just surreal. Like you're watching it almost just like, this doesn't feel real. This feels like a fan-made something. Like it's the proper animation, but this just feels like a weird fan fiction thing.
As I was watching this, I started getting very excited. This is where things almost turned for me, and then we went back. But I want to talk about a couple of things that were funny. So Asuka like removes the covers from Shinji, and he's got a boner, and she slaps the shit out of him, and it was so funny. And I was like, these are the moments I missed. Yep. And there's another one where he like gets mad at her and calls her, he's like, you're just a fussy busybody. And she gets so mad that he calls her a fussy busybody. And I was just like rolling laughing. I thought it was so funny. But at this moment that I'm seeing this, I'm thinking of you talking about how everyone hates these episodes. And I'm like, wait, are they going to make this whole show a dream that he had? Because I honestly, at this point, would love that. And I feel like that would piss so many people off. But like, I was like, dude, if this is a dream, I forgive you for what you've done to me the last half of this episode. But it's not. It's not a dream.
No. Yeah, so despite this glimpse at a possible reality that he could have led, Shinji just remains stagnant in this world and how he views himself. He hates himself. He's really locking on to this. And that's where we get that line about the only person who can console you and truly understand you is you yourself, so you need to take care of yourself. He's insisting that he can't. I like they're talking at one point about like almost like your learned perceptions and experiences, or not experiences, but your own perceptions and assumptions about the world are learned from others. And so she's talking about how, like, you're conditioned to believe that rainy days are bad days, but fun things can happen on rainy days as well. And it's kind of just like how you're choosing to approach something or view something. If you're going into it already believing the worst connotation about it or likelihood of it, whatever, it's like you're coloring that experience before anything can even unfold. And so it's like, if you wake up saying this is going to be a terrible day, you're going to find every reason to validate that. But if you wake up with a more positive or at least neutral perception, you're at least allowing things to unfold for you in a way more positive and more likely to have a positive impact on your life. And Shinji just kind of stays locked in on this. I think Ray at one point says someone who hates others will project that hate onto others and then be unable to trust them. Because that's Shinji just assuming everybody hates him, and even though Asuka and everyone else is saying that's just you're assuming that. Nobody has told you that. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you've told Shinji you hate him at least 400 times, but from anyone else, that line would have landed just fine.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. She's definitely not the appropriate messenger for that.
Yeah, and Shinji just locks onto this. We hear him use this progression 3 or 4 times, I feel like, in the series, that I'm dishonest, a snake, a coward, and a weakling. Mm-hmm. But then he's kind of starting to realize, like, but, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, but maybe I could change. Maybe I could start to change how I view things. Maybe I won't, in time, hate myself the way that I do now. And you're getting this kind of, like, fracturing glass effect. And the idea is that it's like his breakthrough moment, essentially. It's like, regardless of how you feel about yourself now, if you can at least open yourself to this possibility that it will get better, you're at least breaking from this stagnation and allowing yourself to move forward. So yeah, basically, maybe I can change. Maybe I won't always hate myself. Maybe it's okay to be here, to exist. And then we get Shinji surrounded by all the applauding people from his life, everyone from Nerve and everyone. And they're saying, congratulations, and they're going down like one at a time, each of them congratulating him. And then we end with the words on screen: to Father, thank you; to Mother, goodbye; and to all the children, congratulations. Which I don't think that's just like Shinji's world, essentially. I feel like that's more metaphorical in this case, applying to just people in general. Thank you for the lessons that you taught me. In the mother case, it's like, again, when you are born and then grow, you eventually do, to some extent, separate from your mother and everything. And so it's that parting from your first home, essentially, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then to the children who basically endured this trauma and still found a way to exist and go on and make the world what it is. Congratulations. I think that's a personal message from Ano on that at the close. So yeah, this was the last episode of the original series. Again, polarizing. I like it if it's not for the fact that it was the last thing that was originally planned. We had to wait a year to get, because this came out in March of '97. It was July of the following year when End of Evangelion came out. And when they first came back, before they did End of Evangelion, they actually did Rebirth True, which is basically like a 2-hour movie summarizing the series. I've heard there's a couple of deleted scenes in it, but it's basically a recap of what you've all seen. There's nothing new really added. Maybe just a couple of scenes that like better contextualize some of the stuff they're saying here. So we're going to skip that. We're going to go to the End of Evangelion, which is basically episodes 25 and 26.
Wait, you're saying I could have watched a 2-hour show that would have taken away all this other stuff?
Hey man, if we're doing a podcast, there's not that much to mine from just that. Going this route, I gave us up to 30 episodes. Now, we did the first like 7 or 8 episodes, 2 episodes apiece, but 26 episode series, End of Evangelion plus 4 rebuild movies, so 31, up to 31 potential episodes. But yeah, and even then, I think Rebirth True or whatever it is like it. You can't encapsulate everything in 2 hours, especially for something like Ava. Like you can brush people's memory of whatever, like brush up on some like, oh yeah, okay, I remember that plot point, but there's just too much to cover to really feel like you're developing things. It's hard to jump into just that, having not seen the series, and then still know exactly what's going on. But
I would love to recut Neon Genesis. Like,
yeah.
I think I could make a cut that would just be absolutely fantastic and just take out all the garbage that gets put in there. And I'm sure you could do this as well, but it's like, just to imagine, like, what if I could take out the things that like really didn't give the story much weight and really just like took our time away? I think you could cut the series in half and really have like a very solid product.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know about half, but you could certainly cut out a third or something, 25 to 33%. I think and still get something solid.
Half.
Yeah. So this episode in particular, I mean, 25 and 26, but especially this episode was kind of Anno's cathartic rehabilitation, essentially, for himself trying to heal the wounds he still felt like he had through the vehicle of the show, which had kind of become the embodiment of his depression and stuff. He channeled so much of what he was feeling through the work that it was like, okay, now let me bring it home, and I'm more focused on the actual healing than I am on this grand spectacle close. And again, I understand that reasoning, and it's his IP, his story, everything to do that with. But I think he maybe underestimated the fan reaction and what they were wanting. Even though this is sort of a subversion of your mecha anime, people wanted to see the Avas fighting some threat. They wanted to see this big, just glorious whatever. And we talked about too, there were plot points that just disappeared, that were introduced in the final episodes of the series, and then just we never see them. And it's like, where was that going? What was that going to be? So I get it, but it's kind of amazing to me in particular that despite all of that, he still felt like you could say he begrudgingly gave in to like the fan demand to redo the ending essentially. But I do think he, as much as it probably hurt him to see how many people were angry at him, I do think that he still felt like he owed something to them, because while I jokingly referred to End of Evangelion before almost as like Anno's revenge against his own fan base a little bit, the effort that he puts into it is so amazing. Like, it is truly, like, if he just wanted to do something, to be like revenge against the fans, he would half-ass it and just like kill everybody off or do whatever. He would just drag it through the mud and be like, yeah, there you go, there's your ending. Instead, he he really puts a lot of thought and effort into it, and maybe that time away, again, about a year between the end of the series and then the end of Evangelion coming out. And from an animation standpoint, that's not a lot of time to do an 86-minute movie or whatever, but maybe that time allowed him to kind of like decompress, work through some of his stuff, and then say, okay, now that I'm not just smashed under a boot against a deadline, let me think about how I would do this ending. Because when he got to the end of 24, he couldn't think up in his mind how he would even try to approach something like that, like the ending beyond Kaoru's death. Now with that extra year, he had time to reflect and to think about it and to take new frustrations and things he wanted to explore while staying within the themes. And he built something I think is truly incredible. It is my favorite movie. And for a while I was just like, it's my favorite anime movie. And the more I rewatch it, and I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times total now, it always has me spellbound. So I'm just like, yeah, that it's the only movie I can say that about that. No matter how many times I watch it, I'm just completely enthralled, paying full attention. and just trying to find any little clue or hint or anything that can add further, even if it's just interpretive understanding or analysis, just anything I can find from it, because I really do think it is a masterpiece of a work.
Well, I'm excited.
That's what we got to look forward to. I told you 25 and 26 were going to frustrate you, but End of Evangelion will make up for a lot of damage, I think. So I figure when we watch it, we'll run audio to get our reactions at the time, but I don't want us focusing on like heavy notes or anything. I kind of want to just drink it in the first viewing or whatever. And then like in the subsequent days, if we each want to do our own separate viewings again, like if you want to get deep notes or whatever, that's fine. But I think the first viewing, we should try to go in almost clean slate, just drinking in that experience,
Yeah.
So cool. Well, we will have a banger of an episode here coming up. This current episode will drop on Monday, so it'll be 2 weeks before we drop the End of Evangelion episode, but we will be recording initially right afterwards, and then we'll figure out if we want to come back with additional thoughts or anything after that. But that pretty much wraps up this episode, wraps up the original Neon Genesis Evangelion series. You may think our take's cheap, but to you we say, make your own podcast, figure it out. You analyze this, decode all of this stuff. This is this is a haul to try and do all this, especially later episodes with how interpretive they became. So we'll be back soon. I don't even know really what else to add to that, really. Until next time, guys, I've been Derek.
And I've been Matt.
Peace.